No one dared to touch her, until the cowboy stepped in to help the widowed Apache woman Wild West. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint scent of sage and dry earth. Birds chirped softly in the distance, their songs a gentle contrast to the harshness of the land around her. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, her dark eyes scanning the horizon. Life had become a quiet struggle, but Ayanna carried herself with a dignity that refused to bend even in the face of loneliness and sorrow. Her home was modest, a simple structure of wood and clay, with a thatched roof that had seen many seasons. Smoke curled from the small chimney, signaling the fire that had been lit early to prepare breakfast. Inside, she had arranged her few belongings with care: a small collection of clay pots, a worn but sturdy blanket, and a few tools she used for farming and daily chores. Everything she owned was practical, yet there was an elegance in how she kept it. It reflected her careful, thoughtful nature and the strength that had helped her survive the loss of her husband. The townspeople rarely visited her house. Some were wary because she was an Apache woman, a people whose presence in the settlement had always been met with suspicion and distance. Others whispered about her in the marketplace, unsure how to approach her, unsure whether her quiet independence was something to admire or fear. Ayanna had long stopped caring what they thought. She did her work, spoke when necessary, and kept her own company. Her life had grown into a rhythm of self-reliance, and she had learned that solitude, while often heavy, could also be a source of strength. Despite her quiet life, mornings were never easy. She stepped into the small courtyard to feed her goats, scattering grain with practiced hands. The animals bleated softly, their warm bodies nudging her legs, seeking attention as they had every morning. Ayanna smiled faintly, the gesture rare but genuine. She spoke to the goats in low, soft tones, as if her words could calm the winds and the harshness of the world around her. They were her companions, her small family, and she treated them with patience and care that mirrored the love she had once shared with her late husband. After tending to the animals, she moved to the small garden she had cultivated. The soil was dry, cracked in some places, but Ayanna had learned to coax life from the unforgiving earth. Rows of corn and squash stood tall, their green leaves a bright contrast to the golden brown of the desert sands. Each plant had been planted by her own hands, watered carefully, and tended with the hope that it would provide sustenance through the harsh seasons. Life here demanded resilience, and Ayanna embodied it fully. Every seed she planted was an act of defiance against loneliness and despair, a promise that life could persist even in the most difficult circumstances. Even as she worked, the town around her carried on. Men rode past on horseback, their boots kicking up dust. Children ran along the dirt streets, laughing and chasing one another, their voices bright and carefree. Merchants called out from their market stalls, advertising flour, cloth, and tools. Yet even in the midst of this small bustle, Ayanna remained distant. She was a figure apart, a woman of quiet dignity who walked her own path. Her presence was respected from afar but seldom approached. People admired her strength silently, but did not dare cross the invisible line she had drawn around herself. In the afternoons, the sun would blaze high, turning the desert into a furnace. Ayanna would take a brief rest under the shade of a large mesquite tree, sipping water from a clay jug. She would close her eyes and let the warmth wash over her, thinking of days gone by and the husband she had lost. Memories came unbidden, soft and sharp at once. She remembered his laughter, the gentle way he had held her hand during difficult times, and the hope they had shared for a life together. Those memories were bittersweet, a mixture of joy and sorrow, reminding her of love that had been real and deep, yet also of the emptiness left behind. Yet Ayanna did not allow herself to be consumed by sadness. She understood that life demanded perseverance, and there was work to be done. She returned to her home to repair fences that had fallen under the weight of storms, mend tools worn by constant use, and prepare meals from the harvest she had carefully nurtured. She did these tasks with patience, her movements deliberate and precise. Every nail she hammered, every plant she watered, every meal she prepared was a statement of her determination to survive and thrive despite her isolation. Evenings brought a quiet stillness to the desert. The sky turned shades of orange and purple, and the wind whispered softly through the trees. Yana would light a small lantern, its glow flickering against the walls of her home. She would sit by the fire, repairing clothing or crafting small items she could use or trade. Sometimes she would hum a gentle tune, a melody passed down from her ancestors, filling the small space with warmth and memory. The night was her companion as much as her goats or her garden. In the darkness, she found a strange comfort, a reminder that even in solitude, life continued with its own rhythm. Though the town kept its distance, Ayana's presence was not entirely unnoticed. There were those who watched her from afar, curious about the quiet Apache woman who moved through her days with strength and purpose. They wondered how she managed alone, how she could survive the harshness of the desert and the skepticism of the community. Children sometimes lingered at the edge of her property, shyly watching her work, learning from her example without knowing it. Adults whispered quietly, respecting her abilities even if they could not bridge the gap of fear and misunderstanding that had grown over generations. Yana had long since learned that trust was rare, especially in a world that feared what it did not understand. She had been judged for her heritage, for her solitude, and for her independence, yet she never let these judgments define her. She met the world with quiet dignity, choosing to act with care and thoughtfulness rather than anger or resentment. Her life was a testament to resilience, a story told in small acts of courage, in tending the earth, caring for animals, and maintaining her home with care. As night deepened, Ayana would finally lie down on her simple bed, wrapped in her worn blanket. She would look out the window at the stars, countless points of light scattered across the vast sky. They reminded her that even in the emptiness of the desert, there was beauty, there was hope, and there was continuity. She would close her eyes, letting sleep take her, ready to face another day in the unforgiving land she called home. Each day was a challenge, yes, but also a testament to her enduring spirit, a reflection of the quiet strength that defined her life. Yana's story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic events, at least not yet. It was a story of quiet courage, of persistence in the face of loneliness and hardship, of living with dignity when the world around you hesitated to understand or support you. And though the townspeople kept their distance, Ayana's life continued, small acts building upon each other, forming a foundation of resilience that would one day attract the attention of someone who would see her not as a figure to be feared, but as a person to be respected and valued. In that way, every sunrise brought not only the harsh light of the desert, but also the quiet promise of life, endurance, and the possibility that the solitude she had long endured might one day be softened by understanding, kindness, and human connection. Until that day came, Ayana remained steadfast, a solitary figure in the vast Wild West, living each day with purpose, strength, and an unwavering heart. Life in the Wild West was never easy, and for Ayana, the challenges of each day were as numerous as the grains of sand in the desert. While her mornings had been spent tending her animals and caring for her small garden, the afternoons brought a different kind of struggle, one that tested her strength, patience, and resolve. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the earth, dry and cracked, seemed to soak up every ounce of water she could bring to her crops. Yet, Ayana faced these difficulties with determination, never letting the harshness of her surroundings break her spirit. One of her greatest challenges was simply surviving on her own. After the death of her husband, the world had grown colder, not in the physical sense, but in how people treated her. The townspeople, though not openly cruel, were distant. They whispered behind their hands in the market or gave her a polite nod from afar, but no one offered help unless it was absolutely necessary. Some feared her because she was Apache. Others were unsure how to approach a woman who had always carried herself with quiet independence. For Yana, this distance was a familiar companion, one she had learned to live with, though it sometimes weighed heavily on her heart. Despite the isolation, Yana's days were filled with work. She carefully tended her goats, checking each one for signs of illness or injury. When one bleated too loudly, signaling hunger or discomfort, she would respond immediately, guiding it to fresh grass or water. Her goats were more than just animals. They were companions, reminders that life could continue even when people failed to understand or accept her. She took pride in caring for them, knowing that her efforts kept them healthy and allowed her to sustain herself with their milk and occasional trade at the town market. Her small farm was another source of constant labor. The soil in the desert was unforgiving, often hard and dry, requiring careful attention to nurture any plant. Yana had learned to conserve water, using it sparingly and wisely to irrigate her rows of corn, squash, and beans. Each plant represented a tiny victory against the harshness of her environment, and she celebrated these successes quietly, taking joy in the resilience of life itself. She moved slowly but efficiently, her hands strong from years of work, her mind focused on the tasks at hand. Food was another constant concern. With limited resources, Yana had to be creative, turning the produce she grew into meals that could sustain her through long days. She roasted corn over the fire, boiled beans, and made soups from the vegetables she carefully cultivated. Every meal was a reflection of her ability to survive alone, a testament to her resourcefulness. Evenings often found her sitting by the small hearth, eating quietly, reflecting on the day's work and planning for the next. There was no one to share her meals with, no one to converse with, and yet she found a rhythm in this solitude, a way to make her own company sufficient. The townspeople's avoidance of her was another struggle. Children would sometimes peek curiously from behind fences, their eyes wide with interest, yet they never approached too closely. Adults, cautious and wary, would nod politely or avert their gaze entirely. Yana understood this behavior, for she had experienced it her whole life. Her heritage marked her as different, and difference often bred fear, yet she never allowed this to diminish her pride. She moved with dignity, her posture straight, her gaze steady, letting the world know she was not weak, not to be underestimated. Still, the world around her was not only shaped by human behavior, nature itself was a relentless challenge. The desert was both beautiful and dangerous. Sudden storms could flood her fields, winds could uproot her young plants, and the blazing sun could scorch her crops in hours. Yana learned to anticipate the moods of the weather, reading the sky, listening to the wind, and watching the behavior of animals. When dark clouds gathered on the horizon, she would work tirelessly to secure her animals and protect her crops. Her life was a constant balance between patience and action, waiting for the right moment while preparing for the worst. The evenings were sometimes the hardest, for they brought both physical exhaustion and the sharp pangs of loneliness. As the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle above, Ayana would sit by the fire, her mind wandering to memories of her husband. She remembered the days they had spent working the land together, sharing stories and dreaming of a future that had been cruelly cut short. Those memories were bittersweet, a source of both comfort and sorrow. Yet Ayana never allowed grief to consume her. She honored the past while focusing on the present, understanding that survival required strength, courage, and clear thought. Despite the hardships, Ayana found small joys that brought color to her life. The laughter of children in the distance, the gentle bleating of her goats, the sight of a green shoot pushing through dry soil. These moments reminded her that life continued, that hope was never entirely lost. She took pleasure in the simple acts of creation, planting seeds, repairing fences, cooking meals, and keeping her home in order. Each task, no matter how small, was a victory against the challenges of the world, a way to assert her independence and her right to live fully in a land that often tested her limits. One day, while tending her goats near the edge of the property, Ayana noticed a group of men passing by on horseback. They were townspeople she had seen before, their faces familiar, though they rarely spoke to her. Today, however, their curiosity was evident. They slowed as they approached, watching her with cautious interest. Ayana continued her work, pretending not to notice, her hands steady and confident as she scattered feed for her animals. The men lingered for a moment, exchanging whispers, then rode away without a word. She did not feel fear, only the familiar weight of solitude. People were often uncertain how to engage with her, and she had learned to navigate this uncertainty with grace and resilience. Ayana's days were long, but they were also filled with lessons. She learned to read the signs of nature, anticipate the needs of her animals, and manage her farm with skill and efficiency. She developed a keen awareness of the world around her, noticing subtle changes in the wind, shifts in the behavior of animals, and signs of impending weather. Her knowledge was hard-earned, a combination of experience, observation, and inherited wisdom from her family. It was a knowledge that allowed her to survive where others might falter, a skill that reinforced her independence and her confidence in her own abilities. And yet, despite all her resilience, Ayana sometimes allowed herself moments of quiet longing. She would sit by the edge of her property as the sun set, watching the colors of the sky change from orange to deep violet. She thought of companionship, of someone who might understand her, respect her, and share the burdens of life without diminishing her independence. These thoughts were fleeting, tempered by reality, yet they planted a seed of hope, a quiet, unspoken desire for connection that had not been satisfied by the distant townspeople or the loneliness of her home. In these moments, Ayana's strength was most evident. She did not despair, she did not give up. Instead, she carried on, moving with purpose and determination, aware that life was harsh but also full of possibilities. Her resilience became a quiet force, one that shaped her days, guided her decisions, and ensured that she remained unbroken despite the trials she faced. Every sunrise brought a new challenge, and she met it with courage and resolve, learning, adapting, and surviving with dignity. As night fell over the desert, Ayana would close her eyes and reflect on the day's work. Her body was tired, but her spirit remained strong. She had faced another day alone, battled the elements, cared for her animals and plants, and maintained her home. She had survived, not merely endured, but survived with intelligence, strength, and grace. And as the stars appeared in the vast, open sky, she allowed herself a quiet thought. That life, while difficult, was still beautiful, and that perhaps one day, her path might cross with someone who would see her not as a solitary figure to be feared, but as a strong, capable, and worthy person deserving of respect, friendship, and companionship. Even in the isolation of the desert, Ayana's life was full of meaning. Her days were hard, yes, but they were also filled with learning, growth, and small victories. Each task she completed, each seed she planted, each animal she cared for, was a step forward, a testament to her endurance and her unyielding spirit. She moved through the world with quiet confidence, aware of her own worth, and prepared for the day when her resilience might meet with kindness, understanding, and perhaps even the connection she longed for. The morning sun was rising over the horizon, casting golden light across the desert plains, when a figure appeared on the dusty trail that led into the small settlement. Jake, a tall and rugged cowboy, rode steadily on his horse, the leather of his saddle creaking softly with each step. He was a man who had spent many years on the open plains, riding through harsh weather, facing dangers from both men and nature, and surviving through skill and courage. Yet despite his experience and toughness, Jake had a kind heart, one that often led him to notice those whom others ignored. As he rode closer to the settlement, his eyes fell upon Ayanna, working alone in her small field near the edge of the property. She moved with careful precision, scattering feed for her goats and checking on the young plants that had begun to grow in neat rows. Her posture was strong, her movements deliberate, and her face held a quiet determination that seemed to radiate strength. Jake watched for a moment, noting the way she worked without complaint, managing tasks that would have been difficult even for two people. There was something remarkable about the woman's independence, something that caught his attention immediately. He dismounted from his horse, tying it securely to a post nearby. The morning was warm but not yet oppressively hot, and he walked toward her, boots crunching softly on the dry dirt. Ayanna noticed the figure approaching, but she did not look alarmed. Over the years, she had learned to be cautious, to observe the intentions of those who came near her property. Many had come and gone, some with curiosity, some with disrespect, and she had learned that a careful gaze could often reveal more than words ever could. "Morning," Jake said, his voice calm and friendly, carrying easily over the quiet sounds of the desert. "Name S. Jake. I just came into town, thought I'd see who's around." Ayanna paused, her hands resting lightly on her hips. She regarded him with steady eyes, neither suspicious nor welcoming. "Morning," she replied quietly. "I'm Ayanna. This is my land." Her voice was soft but firm, carrying a tone that demanded respect without arrogance. It was the voice of someone accustomed to standing alone, someone who had learned to rely on herself above all else. Jake nodded, a small smile on his face. "I can see that. Looks like you've been working hard." He gestured toward the goats and the growing crops. "You've got a good system going here." Ayanna's expression softened slightly, though she did not completely relax. Compliments were rare and trust even rarer. "I manage," she said simply. She had learned to be cautious with strangers, for words could be misleading and appearances could deceive. Yet something about this man felt different. He spoke without judgment, without unnecessary curiosity, and without pity. His presence was calm, steady, and unobtrusive, qualities she had not often encountered. Over the following days, Jake returned to the edge of her property at various times, always careful to offer help without intruding. Sometimes he carried water for her crops, other times he repaired a fence that had been weakened by wind or animal activity. Each act was small, yet meaningful, demonstrating a respect for her independence while still providing assistance. Ayanna noticed the difference immediately. Unlike the townspeople who observed from a distance, whispered, or avoided interaction altogether, Jake did not treat her as someone to fear or ignore. He treated her as an equal, someone capable, deserving of respect. Their interactions began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Jake would offer a nod or a brief word when he rode past, and Ayanna would respond with a simple acknowledgement. Over time, these small gestures grew into conversations. They would talk while she worked, sharing stories about the land, about animals, and about the daily challenges of life in the desert. Jake spoke with an easy confidence, sharing experiences from his life on the open plains, while Ayanna listened attentively, her curiosity growing as she realized this man had seen much of the world beyond her small settlement. One afternoon, as the sun blazed high in the sky, Jake noticed a section of her fence that had collapsed. Without hesitation, he dismounted and began to work on it. Ayanna paused her tasks, watching him move with skill, using the tools she had long relied upon herself. She expected him to finish quickly and leave, as most men did when offered a task to complete, but he continued to work patiently, adjusting beams and tightening posts with careful attention. When he looked up, he met her gaze with a smile. "There. That should hold for a while," he said. Iana nodded, impressed by his competence and the care he had taken. It was not long before Jake began to notice other signs of the challenges Iana faced. The desert was unforgiving, and the wind often tore at the young plants, scattering soil and weakening their roots. Animals sometimes wandered too far, and the limited water supply required careful planning. Jake began to offer help in subtle ways, suggesting improvements to irrigation, showing her how to create small barriers to protect plants from the wind, and teaching techniques he had learned over years of living on the plains. Each suggestion was offered respectfully, never demanding, never condescending. Gianna listened, tested the methods, and slowly incorporated them into her routines. Their companionship began to deepen naturally. It was not a sudden friendship, but a gradual understanding built on shared work, mutual respect, and a recognition of each other's strengths. Iana felt a sense of trust growing, something she had rarely allowed in her life since her husband's passing. Jake did not intrude upon her space, did not question her independence, and did not assume she needed him in the ways that others might. Instead, he offered support, understanding, and a presence that was steady and reliable, a rare gift in a world where she had learned to rely solely on herself. As weeks passed, the townspeople began to notice the change. The quiet Apache woman who had been so isolated was no longer entirely alone. A rugged cowboy, known for his kindness and skill, appeared regularly at her property, assisting in ways that were practical and respectful. Whispers circulated in the marketplace, some expressing curiosity, others surprise. Yet Ayana paid little attention to these murmurs. She was focused on the work at hand, on the rhythm of life in her small settlement, and on the gradual, unspoken bond that had formed with Jake. Evenings became a time of shared effort and conversation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange, purple, and pink, Jake and Ayana would often sit by the fire, repairing tools, planning for the next day, or simply talking. They shared stories of their pasts, Jake of the long rides across plains and mountains, the dangers he had faced and the people he had met. Ayana of her life in the settlement, her family, her lost husband, and the lessons she had learned in solitude. In these moments, a quiet understanding grew, one built not on words alone but on respect, shared labor, and recognition of each other's resilience. One afternoon, a sudden dust storm rolled across the plains, strong winds whipping dirt into the air, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Ayana had been tending her goats when the storm arrived, and she struggled to secure them in their pens. Without hesitation, Jake rode through the blowing dust, guiding her animals, reinforcing pens, and helping her protect the young plants from the destructive winds. Side by side, they worked through the chaos, their actions synchronized as if they had done this together many times before. By the time the storm passed, the farm had been saved from major damage, and Ayana felt a new depth of trust and gratitude for the man who had come to her aid. It was during moments like these that Ayana realized something she had not felt in a long time, a sense of companionship and security. Jake was not just a helper, he was someone she could rely on, someone whose presence brought calm and strength. She did not take this lightly, for her life had been defined by independence and caution. Yet in the quiet aftermath of the storm, as they surveyed the farm together, she felt a small but undeniable warmth in her heart, a spark of hope that perhaps life could offer connection even in the harshest of landscapes. Their relationship continued to grow with each passing day, subtle and steady. They did not rush into familiarity, but the bond they shared became evident in small gestures. The way Jake would carry water when the well ran low, the way Ayana would smile at his presence, the quiet conversations by the fire that stretched long into the evening. It was a companionship built on respect, shared effort, and understanding, a rare and precious thing in a world that often rewarded distance and suspicion. Gianna, who had once faced each day alone, began to feel the presence of another person who truly saw her. Not as a figure to be feared, nor as someone to pity, but as a strong, capable woman who deserved respect, kindness, and the possibility of connection. Jake, for his part, recognized her strength and independence, admiring the way she faced life with courage and dignity. In each other, they had found a partnership that was rare, built not on necessity but on mutual respect and genuine care. By the time the sun set each evening, painting the desert sky with its vivid colors, both Ayanna and Jake knew that their lives had changed. The quiet Apache woman who had long endured solitude was no longer entirely alone, and the cowboy who had wandered into the settlement had discovered a connection deeper than simple friendship. Together, they had begun to navigate the challenges of the Wild West, finding strength and companionship in a world that often demanded isolation and independence. The desert had been unusually dry that season, and the sun beat down on the land with relentless intensity. Despite her careful planning, Ayanna had noticed that her crops were struggling more than usual. Corn leaves curled in the heat, squash vines drooped, and the soil, even after hours of tending, seemed unwilling to give life to her seeds. The struggle to survive had always been part of her life, but now it seemed that nature itself had become an even greater challenge. She had faced hardships before, yet something about the oppressive heat and the unyielding earth weighed heavily on her spirit that morning. Jake noticed it as well. As he rode toward her property, he saw the lines of worry on her face and the fatigue in her movements. He had become a regular presence in her life, not because she needed constant help, but because he genuinely cared. Today, however, the stakes seemed higher. The crops, the animals, and even the small shelter of her home were vulnerable to the extremes of the desert. Jake could see that the land demanded more than routine care. It demanded urgent action. "Morning, Gianna," Jake called, tying his horse to a nearby post. His voice carried warmth and calm, a contrast to the harsh environment surrounding them. "Looks like the sun's really taking a toll today." Gianna nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "It's worse than usual," she admitted. "I've done all I can, but the heat, it's too much for the plants." Her voice carried a mixture of frustration and concern, but also a quiet determination. She would not allow the land to defeat her, no matter how difficult the task. Jake approached her, scanning the fields carefully. He noted the dryness of the soil, the stress in the plants, and the restless behavior of the goats, who wandered more than usual, searching for cooler spots. "We'll fix this," he said with quiet confidence. "We just need to protect the young plants and keep the animals safe until the sun passes its peak." Together, they worked methodically. Jake helped reinforce the fences to prevent the animals from trampling the fragile crops. He suggested creating small barriers using boards and rocks to shield the young plants from the harsh sunlight. Ayanna listened and followed his advice carefully, appreciating his practical knowledge and the respect with which he offered guidance. Their hands moved in harmony, planting, watering, and securing, as if they had been partners for years rather than mere days. The hours passed slowly, and the sun climbed higher, burning their skin and draining their energy. Sweat soaked their clothes, dust clung to their hair, and the air seemed to shimmer with heat. Yet they did not stop. When Ayanna's arm grew tired from lifting water, Jake took the bucket without hesitation, carrying it to the plants. When a fence post splintered under the strain of the wind, they worked side by side to replace it. Each act of teamwork strengthened their bond, not through words alone, but through the shared effort and resilience required to face the challenges of the desert together. By midday, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. Gianna looked up, squinting against the bright sun, and felt a sudden twinge of worry. The wind shifted direction, carrying with it the scent of rain mixed with dust. Storms in the desert were unpredictable and could be dangerous, bringing sudden floods or fierce gusts that destroyed fences, crops, and even small shelters. She glanced at Jake, who had already noticed the change in the weather. "We need to get the animals inside," he said firmly. Working quickly, they guided the goats into a sturdier pen closer to the house. Yana held the gate steady while Jake corralled the more restless animals, his calm voice reassuring them amidst the rising wind. It was a chaotic scene, with dust swirling around them and the first drops of rain beginning to fall. The storm had arrived suddenly, and they had only moments to prepare. Yet in the midst of the chaos, there was no panic. Each of them knew their tasks, moving with efficiency and purpose, their previous days of shared effort creating a silent understanding between them. The storm hit with full force. Rain poured down in sheets, water rushing across the dirt paths and flooding parts of the garden. The wind howled, bending the small trees and threatening to tear apart anything not secured. Yana shouted over the roar, directing Jake to protect the young plants while she secured additional barriers. He nodded, lifting boards and tying them to stakes with rope, his movements precise despite the conditions. Together, they battled the storm side by side, their teamwork a shield against the destruction that threatened to overtake the farm. Hours passed in this intense struggle. The storm seemed unending, yet they refused to give up. Their hands were blistered, their clothes soaked and heavy, but they persisted, knowing that the survival of Ayana's small farm depended on their efforts. When a tree limb threatened to collapse onto the goat pen, Jake acted quickly, holding it steady while Ayana guided the animals to safety. Every action, every decision carried weight, yet their determination never faltered. By evening, the storm finally began to subside. The rain lessened to a gentle drizzle, and the wind softened to a whisper. The farm had survived with minor damage, thanks to their tireless efforts and the seamless coordination between them. Yana sank onto a dry patch of ground, exhausted, her body trembling from fatigue. Jake knelt beside her, offering water and a comforting smile. "We made it," he said simply. Yana nodded, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she caught her breath. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel relief, a rare moment of vulnerability. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she admitted quietly. Her voice was soft, carrying more honesty than she had allowed herself to express in years. She had faced countless hardships alone, yet in this moment she realized the power of shared strength and the comfort of someone who truly cared. Jake smiled, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "You're stronger than you know," he said. "I just happened to be here to help." His words were simple, but they carried weight, acknowledging her resilience while offering support without diminishing her independence. Yana felt a warmth in her chest, a small but significant spark of trust and connection that had been missing from her life for so long. As the sky cleared and stars began to emerge, Ayana and Jake surveyed the farm together. The damage was minimal, and the goats were safe, their bleats soft and content after the storm's chaos. Ayana realized that the bond between them had grown deeper, forged in the heat of adversity and the necessity of cooperation. She had allowed herself to depend on someone else without fear, to trust another person with her livelihood, and to recognize that companionship did not diminish her strength, it enhanced it. The experience of facing the storm together marked a turning point in their relationship. They had shared not just work, but danger, struggle, and triumph. Yana saw Jake not merely as a helpful presence, but as a partner in a way she had never experienced before. His strength complemented hers, his calm determination balanced her cautious independence, and together they had overcome a challenge that would have been nearly impossible alone. That night, as they tended to minor repairs and secured the remaining crops, Ayana felt a sense of gratitude and understanding that had been absent from her life for years. She realized that life in the Wild West was harsh and unpredictable, but it was also full of opportunities for connection, trust, and mutual respect. She had faced storms before, both literal and figurative, yet none had brought her closer to another person in the way this one had. By the time they finally rested, the desert was calm once again. The moon reflected softly on the wet earth, and the stars twinkled above like distant guides. Yana settled by the fire, her body weary but her spirit lifted. Jake sat nearby, quietly observing the night sky, his presence steady and reassuring. In the stillness, Ayana allowed herself a rare thought. Perhaps life could offer more than survival, more than mere endurance. Perhaps it could offer connection, understanding, and the quiet strength of someone who truly cared. The storm had tested them both, and in facing it together, they had discovered a bond neither had anticipated. Ayana, who had long endured solitude, found herself sharing trust, effort, and respect with another human being. Jake, who had wandered into the settlement seeking nothing more than work and purpose, found himself drawn to a woman whose strength, courage, and dignity matched his own. In the harsh world of the Wild West, they had found not only survival but a shared path forward, one that promised hope, companionship, and the possibility of something lasting. As the night deepened, Ayana looked at Jake and allowed herself a small smile. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, and new hardships. Yet she also knew that together they could face whatever came. The storm had proven that partnership, trust, and respect could overcome even the most daunting trials, and in that realization, Ayana felt a quiet but profound sense of peace. The desert mornings had begun to feel different for Ayana. The sun rose over the horizon as it always had, casting golden light across her small farm, but now there was a sense of quiet anticipation in the air. The storm from the previous week had left the earth fresh and damp, and the plants that had struggled before were slowly recovering. There was a calmness to the land that mirrored the change in Ayana's own heart. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of companionship, a connection that had been absent since her husband's passing. Jake had become a constant presence in her life. He came not as an intruder but as a partner, someone who respected her independence while offering support when needed. Together, they repaired fences, reinforced irrigation systems, and tended to the young crops that had survived the storm. Every task was approached with a sense of shared purpose, their movements coordinated as naturally as if they had worked side by side for years. The farm, which had once been a symbol of solitary survival, now represented partnership, cooperation, and the quiet power of mutual respect. The townspeople began to notice the change as well. Yana, once isolated and observed only from a distance, now moved with a new confidence. There was a subtle brightness in her eyes, a calm assurance that spoke of trust and companionship. Children who had peeked timidly from behind fences now waved as she passed, and adults nodded with recognition rather than distant caution. Jake's presence had not only provided her with practical help, but had also created a bridge between her and the town, showing that connection and understanding could exist even in a community cautious of difference. One afternoon, as they rested beneath the shade of a large mesquite tree, Ayana spoke quietly, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. "I never thought I would feel this way again," she said softly, almost to herself. "I thought my life would always be like before, quiet, lonely, and just surviving." Jake looked at her with a gentle smile. "You've always been strong," he said. "I just happened to be here. But I think what we have now, it's more than just surviving, isn't it?" Yana nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Yes, it's more than that, it's living." The words felt heavy with meaning, a declaration of the change that had begun to shape her days and her heart. She realized that life could offer connection, trust, and even love again, without taking away the independence and strength she had fought so hard to maintain. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Jake admired Ayana's courage, her skill in managing the farm, and her unwavering dignity. Iana, in turn, appreciated Jake's kindness, his calm presence, and the way he offered help without judgment or expectation. Together, they faced daily challenges: the unpredictable desert weather, the demands of the crops, and the care of the animals. But they did so with a shared strength that neither had experienced before. Evenings became a time of quiet reflection and comfort. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ayana and Jake would sit by the fire, repairing tools, sharing stories, or simply enjoying the warmth of companionship. The small home, once filled only with the sounds of solitude, now resonated with quiet laughter, conversation, and the soft bleating of goats content in their care. These moments, though simple, were profound, marking the transformation from a life of isolation to one of shared purpose and connection. One particularly bright morning, they ventured to the marketplace together. Yana had always approached this space with caution, aware of the wary eyes and whispered words of the townspeople. But with Jake at her side, she felt a new confidence. They moved through the market, exchanging greetings with familiar faces. The children waved, adults nodded, and a few even stopped to ask about the farm. For the first time, Yana felt seen not as a solitary widow or as someone to be feared, but as a capable woman whose life was valued and respected. Jake's presence had not changed her identity. It had merely allowed the world to recognize her strength. Back at the farm, they continued their work, but now with a sense of anticipation for the future rather than mere survival. The crops that had struggled under the harsh sun were beginning to flourish, and the goats were healthy and well cared for. Iana found herself planning not just for the day ahead, but for the weeks and months to come. She imagined improvements to the irrigation system, new fences, and even small celebrations of harvest. Jake shared ideas and listened carefully, always respectful of her decisions and her expertise. Their partnership was balanced, a harmony of experience, care, and mutual respect. The desert, once a place of isolation and struggle, had become a landscape of opportunity and connection. Yana and Jake faced challenges together: storms, dry spells, and the occasional wandering animal, but each difficulty strengthened their bond. They had learned to rely on each other without compromising their independence, discovering that true partnership was not about taking over someone's life, but about enhancing it through shared effort and understanding. One evening, as the sky darkened and the stars emerged, Iana spoke of the past, of her husband and the life she had known before his passing. Her voice was soft, tinged with nostalgia but also acceptance. "He loved this land," she said, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "He would have been proud to see it thriving again." Jake reached out, gently touching her hand. "He would be proud of you," he said, "of the life you've built, the strength you've shown, and the way you've carried on. But I think he'd also be happy knowing you've found someone to share it with now." Iana smiled, the warmth in her chest growing. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to fully feel the depth of trust, care, and quiet love that had blossomed between them. She had faced loneliness, prejudice, and the harshness of the desert, yet she had emerged resilient, capable, and open to the possibilities of companionship. Jake's presence had not replaced her independence. It had enriched it, showing her that strength and connection could exist side by side. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The farm flourished under their combined care, the animals thrived, and the crops grew strong and healthy. Iana and Jake developed a rhythm together, each aware of the other's strengths and limitations. Their partnership was natural, a blend of trust, respect, and shared effort. The townspeople, once distant and wary, began to acknowledge their bond, offering smiles, greetings, and small acts of assistance. Iana's life, once defined by solitude and survival, had transformed into one of community, connection, and hope. In the quiet moments, Iana reflected on the journey she had taken. She remembered the years of loneliness, the challenges of surviving alone in the desert, and the sorrow that had followed the loss of her husband. Yet she also recognized the resilience she had cultivated, the skills she had mastered, and the strength that had carried her through every difficulty. Jake's arrival had been unexpected, but it had shown her the power of companionship, trust, and respect. Together they had faced storms, nurtured life, and discovered the quiet joy of shared purpose. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange, pink, and purple, Ayanna and Jake stood side by side, surveying the land they had worked to nurture. The farm was thriving, the animals content, and the world around them calm. Ayanna felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she was no longer entirely alone. The bond they shared had grown strong, rooted in respect, understanding, and shared effort. It was a connection that promised hope, security, and the possibility of a future filled with partnership and care. Ayanna turned to Jake, her eyes shining with gratitude and quiet joy. "I never imagined life could feel like this again," she said softly. "I thought the best I could do was survive, but now I can truly live." Jake smiled, his hand resting gently on hers. "You've always been living," he said. "I just helped you see it wasn't something you had to do alone." In that moment, the hardships of the past seemed to fade, replaced by the promise of a shared future. The desert, with all its challenges and beauty, had become a place of possibility. Ayanna and Jake had discovered that survival alone was not enough, that life was richer, fuller, and more meaningful when shared with someone who respected, understood, and cared. The small farm continued to flourish, a testament to their hard work, trust, and partnership. Ayanna's life, once defined by solitude and struggle, was now filled with laughter, conversation, and the quiet joys of companionship. The storms they had faced together had strengthened their bond, proving that challenges could be overcome when faced side by side. And as the stars twinkled above the desert night, Ayanna knew that she had found not only safety and support, but a rare and enduring connection that would carry her forward into the future. Life in the Wild West was never easy, but for Ayanna and Jake, it had become a story of resilience, trust, and the quiet power of companionship. Together, they had faced the harshness of the land, the challenges of survival, and the solitude that had once defined Ayanna's existence. And together, they had discovered that life was not just about enduring. It was about living fully, with courage, respect, and someone by your side who truly cared.